to Back of the Grid. I'm Chris, and I'm here as ever with Tom.
Hello.
It's Stu.
Hi.
A day later than usual this week because we were gallivanting at Formula E at the weekend, so we needed a day to recover and catch up on F1 stuff. Recover from sitting indoors watching rain through a tiny gap in the side of a convention centre, but
yeah, very exciting.
A good weekend.
That was actually probably the most exciting part of the race, to be honest. Waiting for the race to start.
It wasn't Stu giving us updates on
deciding whether or not we could see enough trees.
Yeah, deciding whether or not to go home.
Which we nearly did, but I'm glad we didn't. Anyway, you're not here for Formula E, even though we love to talk about it. Here for F1. And a pretty packed weekend at Spa, actually. And I thought, as sprint races go, fairly decent one. I guess we've reached the point in this season where anything where Max Verstappen isn't in the lead counts as an exciting race at this point.
What do you mean? I think every lap he leads, I'm so excited all the time.
Edge of your seat.
Yeah, I'm edge of my seat. Will he win? Will he win? Who knows? Anything can happen. You have to see every lap that he's. I actually ride on board with him through the entire race as well, just on like a little separate window, just so I can see every single lap. And
so you bought a whole new monitor just for Verstappen?
Yeah, to study the greatness.
I mean, joking aside, I would probably learn a lot from watching that for 40 laps. I bet
it's actually quite interesting to see him side by side with other drivers and just how he's that much faster.
Yeah. I'd have loved to have been directly on board for his little hairy moment up into Radion. I must admit,
we came close to the Verstappen retirement that, in theory, should happen at some point, but still probably won't. Anyway, sprint race. Everybody, well, half the field pitted at the end of the safety car formation laps.
Let's call it lap one.
Let's call it lap one. The rest of the field pitted on the second lap. Verstappen, the only one of the lead cars in a team to not pit. Can we call that a rare strategic error for Red Bull, or is that them just...
Nah.
We don't need to even take a risk?
We talked about it a little bit over the weekend, didn't we? I think it's one of those things where it's let everybody else dive in quickly. You never know. Some teams might have decided to try and risk double stacking depending on where the cars were. Like, avoid that chaos and just take the stop in once you've stretched out a little bit of a gap. We were only talking second or so at most, but it can make a big difference when you're trying to make sure you don't get caught up in an unsafe release or something.
Yeah, I think overall, I think it was the smart decision. I think if it only takes like a sticky wheel nut or a slight error to slow you down, and then suddenly, if everyone else gets it dead right, then they're all sailing past you, and your job's suddenly 10 times harder. You've suddenly got 15 overtakes to make. 10 overtakes, because he started on pole, didn't he, for the sprint? You suddenly got 10 overtakes to make instead of the one that they had to make to get ahead in the race. So, yeah, I think the conservative move of theirs to hold him out there for one lap and then go into what was at that point in the race, because he'd pulled away of the chasing pack, a slightly less risky pit stop, because even if something did go wrong at that point, if they lost a second in that pit stop, they're not losing loads of positions by having to hold him.
Yeah.
So, I thought it made sense. I thought it was... Initially, you can see how the illusion of it being like, why on earth didn't they pit him? It's what everyone's doing. But that's precisely why, because everyone was pitting. It wasn't worth that risk. So, IQ 1000 for Red Bull for making that call, I think.
And you mentioned unsafe releases. I counted at least 3 over those 2 laps, and just none of them were looked at all. Like, there was some extremely ropey pit releases.
Howlers.
There was looking at them.
Absolute howlers. Gasly's was an absolute howler into the path of Alonso. Alonso had to be on he came out alongside Alonso and blocked off his pit box. So Alonso had to go on the brakes to let him through in order to get to his box. Like, how is that not an unsafe? If that's not an unsafe release, I don't know what is. It's just crazy. I think the FIA there was so much going on. I think the FIA just, instead of in the opposite move to what they did in Austria, where there were so many track limits violations going on, they somehow managed to count every single one of them and applied a penalty for supposedly every single one of them, and it got ridiculous. With this, they seem to make the choice not to apply every single infringement of the rule by the rule book and just let it go. Let the whole thing go.
Just not bother.
Yeah. Like, why? Like, what on earth is that about?
Yeah, really weird.
Yeah.
So strange.
Couple of other sprint things to talk about. Firstly, Piastri led his first laps in F1. A pretty unchallenged second place. Since they upgraded that McLaren, like, that guy is just so on top of it.
Yeah, it was a good car.
Faster than Lando on average all weekend, I would say, which is no mean feat because we know how good Norris can be.
Yes. Really, really good performance. I mean, we've done the Piastri. Let's all sort of pile on the Piastri love thing, haven't we, already in the last couple of episodes? But yeah, he's living up to the challenge. The car's good. The upgrades have brought a lot of pace to that car. I think Norris was in a bit of a pickle because I think he had a bit of damage anyway, didn't he? He in qualifying he damaged the car, and I don't think I think after that, unless it's for safety reasons, you can't really repair. They're not going to put a new floor on it after qualifying.
No.
Anyway. So I think he would have been a little bit hobbled from that. But yeah, almighty performance from a Piastri, and to lead a race must have been a really, really exciting moment for him and for all of his fans.
Cool. Yeah, definitely.
And then the last sprint thing, which we have to talk about, is the Perez and Hamilton incident, for which Hamilton got a 5-second penalty and 2 points on his license.
Thoroughly deserved, I thought. Actually, I think it's ridiculous. He gets away with murder. That guy, Lewis Hamilton, he's always going into people. There's a video online of him just like repeatedly crashing into people. It's outrageous. I mean, I don't know how he's got away with it for so long, to be honest. No, I think it's a stupid penalty. I think if that isn't a racing incident, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
I think if you only have to look back to Verstappen in Brazil in 2021, when I think it was, I can't remember the turn numbers, but the end of the back straight where Verstappen went down the inside of Hamilton. Well, tried to stop Hamilton overtaking by going down the inside and getting the apex, and then just drove Hamilton clean out of road and drove himself off road. If that's a racing incident, then how is Hamilton's situation not a racing incident in this race?
I think it was Austria last season when like 4 drivers got penalties for like running people.
Yeah.
This is the thing. Like, I don't think I'm quite as outraged by this as you seem to be, but at the same time, if you look at the penalties or not penalties in the past, Hamilton wasn't trying to drive Perez off the road. He understeered into him ultimately. Yeah, and if you are going to apportion blame, the blame is on Hamilton because the onus is on him as the overtaking car to not have a crash, and he understeered into someone.
I'm not sure 100%. Go on, carry on.
As you've said, the phrase racing incident exists for a reason, and I personally think the way Perez chopped across the front of Hamilton in the immediate aftermath was as egregious.
Well, that's a separate incident, really. That was
it is a separate incident. But
so let's just separate that for let's separate that for a second, and then let's talk about Hamilton's understeering into. So, like, really, like, Perez knew it was done. Perez was already done at that point. His tires were complete. His rears were absolutely gone.
Yeah.
If you're gonna defend a move in those conditions, if you're going to try and hang it around the outside when he'd already lost the corner, Hamilton was alongside him, then you always run the risk of the car on the inside oversteering into you, especially in the wet. So I don't think you can necessarily blame one person more than the other, which is why I think it's a racing incident. I think they were equally to blame. I think you need to know when you've lost. And, you know, it's the same in sim racing. Like, if someone's coming up your inside and you know they're quicker and you know what grip level you've got, then you know that you're not going to be able to defend that move. So why put yourself in that position where they have the opportunity to understeer into you? Why not? Because what Perez has done there is he's ended his own race by not giving the faster car the space to go through, I would say.
I can see what you're saying, but at the same time, if Perez had just got out of the way of Hamilton, everyone would be saying, "Oh, Perez isn't even fighting positions. His head's gone. He's like not in, and everyone would be piling on him for not."
It's not. I mean, it's nothing no one's already saying, but I think what's happened is he's not been able to continue the race. He's had to retire the car.
Yeah,
so
but that's the risk, right? That's the risk.
Exactly. Yeah, that is it. And there was just as much risk for Hamilton because Hamilton could have damaged. Hamilton could have got a puncture by trying to go for the overtake. And I'm sure I reckon if Hamilton had got a puncture and been through the pits, had to do a tyre change, then he probably wouldn't have got a penalty. But I think it's the fact that Perez eventually retired, there was damage to Perez's car, that's made them go, "Oh, it's not a racing incident. We have to blame someone."
It's back to the old policing the outcome, not the incident.
Exactly.
Discussion we've had many times, isn't it?
Said it for years.
Yeah.
That the outcome of the incident helps dictate the penalty in this sport. Yeah. And I've said for a long time, I don't think that it happens, and it's quite clear that it happens, but I don't think it should be.
I just want to say as well,
like,
I'm not saying just quit and let everyone buy. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm saying know when your race is going south and mitigate against that, because he was absolutely a sitting duck, regardless of that damage that he had. He was already a sitting duck. He was just dropping off, and everyone was going to go past him. He knew his tyres were gone. So, yeah, I think he put himself in a position where that was able to happen.
I can see what you're saying,
it would have been impossible to keep that position no matter what. Like it was going by no matter what. So he kind of squeezed him, I thought, and also Hamilton was already alongside. It was Hamilton's corner. Hamilton was first to the apex.
But if it's as easy as you make it out to be, then Hamilton should have been able to drive past him very easily without understeering into him. So there was obviously
also true, but there's conditions to consider, though, isn't there? Like it's wet, like, and as well, if they want them to race, like they should expect them to be at least. There's going to be like racing incidents are going to happen. On the one hand, they're saying we want to give them room to race and let them race, and then the next thing they're giving them all penalties for bumping into each other. So I think it's not a penalty. Like whatever your opinion is, whether I'm right or wrong about Perez, I don't think it's a penalty either way.
The phrase "racing incident" exists for a reason. In conclusion, right? Should we get to the actual race that most people are interested in? We'll start in Max Verstappen, his unbeatable corner, as we always do. 8 victories in a row now, one short of equaling Vettel's record. He still won by over 22 seconds from his teammate, despite starting 6th on the grid.
So happy.
This stat has blown my mind. Verstappen's average points per weekend now is over 26 points because he's also won every sprint. So his average for the season for a race weekend is 26.1 points.
That is bizarre. That is so strange.
Insanity. As ever, you run at superlatives. I don't know when he actually can wrap up the title now, but the fact we've got to the summer break and it's already been done for weeks is ludicrous. The guy's a machine. Perez, we know he had a miserable sprint. I think I've ever seen someone try to keep going and lose as many places in one lap before. Grand Prix wise, I would say he did the job he's there to do at Red Bull. He took the lead when Verstappen wasn't able to, held second place while Verstappen went and won. Like, it wasn't exactly him taking the fight to Verstappen like he did in the early parts of the season at times, but he was exactly where Red Bull needed him to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he'd have had much of a chance even if he did put up a fight. The way Verstappen was hovering around behind him, like, lifting and coasting into corners just to make sure the pass was on the clean and clear DRS zone of the Camel Straight. I think just yeah, just said everything it needed to. Lifted and coasted into the final sector of the lap. Says a lot.
Started the pit lane and still won that, I think.
Maybe he should.
Anyway.
Maybe they just start from the pit lane. Once he's won the championship, just pop him in the pit lane for every race, and then it'll give us something to talk about.
Let's talk about McLaren next. They were really quick in both qualifying sessions and the sprint, but they kind of leaned more into a wet setup than any other team. And then Sunday came around and was mostly dry, which kind of bit them.
Killed it all for them, didn't it?
there was the one period where it wasn't wet enough for wet tyres, but it was still wet, and Norris was the fastest person on the track.
True. Yeah.
It was a really interesting race for Norris, actually. They gambled him on a really early switch to the hard tyres, and he was just atrocious on them. He ended up last by some margin. So when that little bit of rain started, but wasn't enough for inters, he came in for fresh softs on lap 17 and went out with a slightly wet setup, fresh warm tyres, and he was literally multiple seconds faster than most of the field and basically did like an enormous like long-term undercut and ended up climbing back up to 7th in the points, even though he took those softs for like more than half the race. So kind of an interesting race for Norris, despite everything. Piastri, we lost at turn 1 in a collision with Sainz. Piastri's opinion of it was generally quite sort of middle of the road. Sainz turned it on me, but it's turn 1, these things happen. Sainz was very much of the opinion that Piastri had dive bombed him.
I don't think that's the case at all.
I think dive bomb's a bit extreme, but Piastri was definitely driving.
I don't think
Piastri was definitely driving into a gap that was never going to be there.
The moment he initiated his braking, there was a gap there, and Sainz was braking on a weird line. He was kind of going from one line to the other on his braking.
Sainz locked up, didn't he, trying to get the inside of Hamilton?
Yeah, so I think it was as much Sainz, which is why, again, that is a racing incident. Neither of them were to blame. If anyone, if I was going to blame anyone, I'd blame Sainz for taking a weird line into turn 1, but that's just me.
I think, while I think I agree with you, I think if you have to portion blame, it probably is Sainz. He was the one who was going in there all locked up. He kind of closed the gap. Obviously, Hamilton was on the outside, but it was him that had gone in deep and had to tighten the corner. At the same time, Piastri is never going to go out like that again. Like Piastri's learned a big lesson there.
But again, like the thing is, like he's looking at
his nose into the danger zone.
He's looking at the direction Sainz is going and seeing the direction that's going at the point he hits his brakes. It's the fact that Sainz's direction changed while he was after Piastri had braked. That's the problem.
I think the problem is though you're going down the inside of La Source.
But where else is he going to go? There's cars all around.
How many times have we seen an incident of cars on the inside of that
it's
corner?
It's just what happens.
That corner is a bit of a killer in turn 1. Like you do often get like people get pinched there.
It's practically a hairpin within 100 meters of starting the race.
If I remember rightly.
Exactly, and it's probably one of the tightest turn 1s on the calendar as well, if not the tightest.
Especially now they've got rid of all the runoff that everyone used to use. Remember that year when Kimi just like went steaming in and just drove off the track and round the outside of everybody on the exit? Was that?
Yeah. You know, I mean, what might help there a little bit, but obviously might lead to exploitation, I guess, is if the wall wasn't so close to the apex, because there'd be some element of runoff where someone like Piastri in that scenario could have escaped a little bit, but still kind of been compromised, so wouldn't have got an advantage from cutting across it, if that makes sense.
I think that's
I think you could have maybe saved the scenario, but I mean that's just clutching at ways to stop that being an incident.
I think
to be
that's
honest,
one of the things that makes that such a good corner, though. It's like there's a wall at the apex, like.
Yeah, I mean, well, there are always hairy ones. I think it's one of those corners where you just have to be so much more aware of your surroundings than maybe most of the corners on the calendar, so, especially to turn 1. And I think, the responsibility of that is they all bear as much responsibility in that moment as each other into that corner. Yeah. Everyone knows what a difficult corner it is, and they go into it knowing that there's going to be a squeeze. So the onus is on you as the driver to not be the one who makes that squeeze happen. Almost in a way, you need to be ultra aware of your surroundings, and I think Sainz probably wasn't quite as aware of his surroundings, or either wasn't as aware or didn't put enough care into positioning his car as he probably should. And I think Piastri is probably guilty of the same.
I mean, I sort of see that, but I think, for example, if you look like further back in the grid, it was Stroll versus one of the Alpines. It'll have probably been Tsunoda given the position. Like, that was more or less the same incident, the same positioning with a slightly different outcome, because I guess both drivers had that extra awareness, which is, I guess, surprising, because you'd expect it to normally be the other way around. You'd expect it to be your leading drivers taking that little bit extra care, and those more in the midfield being a little bit more desperate to make the move work.
It's the sort of incident you expect to see in junior series, and for the most part, drivers have got that sort of thing out of their system by F1, but it still happens from time to time.
Yeah. There's maybe an element of, the rookie nature for Piastri. Like, maybe he backs out of it a little bit harder if he's learned from it. I don't know. Like, I don't think there's any blame to really be apportioned either way, because they've both ended up as bad as each other, and they've both got something to kind of account for, I guess. Like, Piastri maybe sticking his nose where it shouldn't have been, and Sainz not being as aware of what's alongside him when he's making a move to avoid Hamilton. So they've both got something to have blame laid at him for.
We're already talking about Ferrari, so I'm going to move us on to them next and keep us going. I don't really need to say much more about Sainz. Leclerc, all things considered, pretty good weekend, pretty complete weekend for him.
Yeah.
He obviously inherited pole after Verstappen's gearbox penalty. He was never going to do anything to avoid Perez passing him, but held off Hamilton
immediately down the Kemmel Straight.
Held off Hamilton, picked up a podium. A pretty solid drive, I thought, from Leclerc. That a sort of clean, solid drive that I think he needed.
Not what I expected, if I'm totally honest.
I thought the Mercedes
going into the weekend
had more race pace, to be honest.
Yeah, and Ferrari have a lack thereof as well. Maybe the cold conditions helped a little bit. The cooler conditions,
especially there were other teams suffering on tyres as well, and Ferrari seemed to avoid that this weekend. It does extend a record that Leclerc has got that he'd be keen to get rid of. That's now 9 pole position, or 9 front row starts, I guess you should say. 9 pole starts in a row now that he's not converted into wins.
But,
it was a pole position because of weird.
But you're always going to struggle to convert a pole position when you're in a Ferrari, and the Red Bulls, when you've got straights as long as this, you've got that Red Bull on the track, then
that 9 extends.
Doesn't account for the other 8, though.
That 9 extends.
That's true. But I think this season,
much better.
Only one of them 9 is this year.
He's never winning this race, but there we go. Mercedes, Hamilton finished 4th from 3rd on the grid. Again, he was never going to stop Verstappen passing him, but pretty solid drive otherwise. He's actually only a point behind
where their car is, didn't they? So
basically,
yeah, that's it. So
caught Alonso in the drivers.
Nicked the fastest lap as well.
Yeah, nicked fastest lap. That puts him 1 point behind Alonso for 3rd in the drivers' championship. Not that Lewis Hamilton cares one bit about finishing 3rd, but there we go.
No, but I bet he'd love to
Alonso
get past Fernando, given the start that they had.
Whether that was
season.
3rd or 4th or 18th and 19th, he would like to beat Alonso.
Yeah, whether it will ever openly be discussed and admitted, I'm pretty confident that there's a slight mentality there of when he looks at those standings, there's a I'm gonna have him. I'm gonna have him. Yeah.
Russell described his weekend as rubbish and said he was glad when it was over. He was kind of off the pace all weekend, wasn't he? He lost a bunch of place at the start and clawed back to 6th, but I mean, there's not much to add really. It was just another fairly middling weekend for him, unfortunately. That's 2 6th in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep rattling through. Aston Martin seemed better this weekend. Alonso climbed up from 9th to 5th. He finished ahead of a McLaren and a Mercedes. That's the first time since Austria. And Aston Martin has finished ahead of either of those teams. I have seen interesting internet rumblings today, I think coming via Ted Kravitz, that the downturn in Aston Martin's performance is potentially because of the FIA quietly closing the loophole that they might have been exploiting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's not really any suggestion of what the loophole might have been, but Ted Kravitz has been sniffing around and asking questions and getting some interesting answers in that kind of vibe, which is, yeah.
Yeah, Ted Kravitz is the kind of guy as well that you could show him virtually identical cars and he would find the difference between them. Like, he's very good. I mean, I'm sure he has assistance with it as well, but from what I've always seen, Ted is very good at being able to quickly identify changes on cars when it comes to things like air, obviously things that are visible in terms of aero and stuff like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's noticed a bit of a change and kind of gone, well, where's this change come from? And as soon as everyone's a bit cagey about why it's happened, then it maybe leads to opening up a couple of stories like this. So
he's not the sort of guy who just says stuff for clicks either, Ted. Like, there's generally...
He doesn't need to, does he?
Exactly, yeah.
He's got his pocket cheese for that.
Gross.
Okay,
Don't
next
think about
bit.
Right, Alpine. Let's try to keep this fairly brief. We might talk about this more as the story develops over the coming weeks. On track, it was their best weekend in a while. Gasly, really good third in the sprint. Then Ocon was 8th in the Grand Prix. That's their best weekend points haul since Monaco. Still, a third in the sprint and 8th, not huge points, but it's an uptick. Off track, however, they suddenly dropped mid-weekend that after the race on Sunday, it was going to be the exit of team principal Otmar Safnauer, sporting director Alan Permain, who has been at Team Enstone for like 35 years, and chief technical officer Pat Fry. Pat Fry actually had chosen to leave himself before this, but it happened to be the same weekend. So in a month at Alpine, we've had that. It started with that announcement of the €200 million investment and Ryan Reynolds involved and all that nonsense. Then the CEO, Laurent Rossi, got shuffled aside and replaced. The head of the power unit division, who'd only been there a few months, suddenly got promoted to vice president of Alpine. And then, like, in the last 5 years, we've had Cyril Abiteboul kicked out, Marcin Bukowski kicked out, Nick Chester, who's the technical director, Bob Bell went as well. Peace Nashan, who was the head of aerodynamics, who was like a big headline signing at the time.
5 years is a long time still, so
it is.
But yeah, you make a good point. It's a bit of a revolving door there at the moment, isn't it?
It's so messy. They've got like an interim principal sporting director now. There's rumours that Mattia Binotto is being lined up to come in to steady the ship now.
Because he did such a good job at Ferrari.
Yeah, exactly. Like, ultimately, it seems like Luca Di Maio, who's the Renault CEO, is just like, nothing's good enough for him. Every time they're not hitting their targets, he's just like kicking people out.
Yeah, this is kind of crazy. I feel like this we can save for maybe in the next couple of weeks. Give it some proper time.
Oh yeah, I think there'll be more to come out over the summer breaks. I imagine of some specifics. Yeah. I think, like, as a quick headline, it's a team that, in my opinion, has not had a proper identity for a while. Like, with stuff like the rebrands, the sponsorships, the shuffling of staff, the now buyout, or well, not buyout per se, but the huge kind of investment purchase. Like, I feel like it's a team that, since being Renault has not truly had a proper stable existence, which probably covers that 5-year period, I would guess. So I'd be interested to see if by the end of the season that is sort of rectified and we're going to next year with something with a little bit of consistency. But they're going to walk into Ferrari problems if they're not careful. Just getting rid of people and turning them over constantly does not lead to performance, as teams like that can testify.
We'll quickly do Alpha Tauri next. Tsunoda wasn't great in qualifying or the sprint, but Grand Prix, Tsunoda did fantastically, I thought, dragging that absolute shed of a car into the points. First point since Baku, I think, for them. Good 20 seconds ahead of Ricciardo. Really good drive for Tsunoda, I thought that.
Yeah, it was a good drive. I think, finishing ahead of his teammate is not going to be that difficult to begin with because, Ricciardo's got to find his feet again at that team. But very good drive otherwise. I think some good action from him as well. So, very enjoyable to watch.
Yeah. Ricciardo's weekend was sort of the other way around. He had a decent sprint. He was unlucky is the wrong word, but he came close to picking up a point in the sprint.
It'd have been a GP point, wouldn't it? It was 10th, I think. Is that right? Yeah.
But yeah, pretty off the pace on Sunday. A little bit of a return to earth after a fairly solid comeback in Hungary, but yeah, only second race back, I guess.
Yeah, give him a chance.
Yeah. And the last couple to wrap up, Alfa Romeo actually looked better, but they kind of botched qualifying, which sort of left them too much to do. They managed to drag themselves back up to like a couple of points outside the points, good place outside the points. 4 races in a row now, they've not scored, but they've had upgrades and they looked a little better, but still not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Williams, pretty disappointing actually. Williams had quite high hopes for this track. Obviously, the wet conditions didn't let them kind of exploit the straight line speed so much that car's got. But then even in the dry on Sunday, they sort of were, all the gains they had in the fast stuff were more than outdone by their loss in the slow stuff, and their deg was pretty high. So
I think they suffered most when they weren't on the soft tyre. Like on the soft tyre, they looked quite racy, and I think what that gave them in those like twistier sections, like the back end of the circuit, it was enough to kind of counter that to some degree. But as soon as they got on the mediums, they could never compete with anyone through the back half of the circuit, could they really? And they'd kind of claw it back going into the start of a new lap, maybe attack someone down the Kemmel Straight with DRS, but couldn't then maintain it on the mediums for whatever reason. So a good first 10 laps for them both, and then all fell apart after that, really, didn't it?
Yeah, it's a shame. We should add as well, with all the Alpine departures, Pat Fry has left to go to Williams to be their new chief technical officer, which is a good signing for Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And probably a statement on how things are at Alpine when someone is leaving to go to, what are they, the 8th place team currently, Williams?
Yeah, but I think
it
shows you the pull of what the new management is doing there, though. So
definitely.
There's definitely an upturn in form at that team. So I feel like it feels like they're on the right path.
And that combined with what Pat Fry will have probably been able to see unfolding in front of his own eyes of Alpine has probably just led him to maybe start looking around the grid. And a team like Williams is going to jump at the chance for someone like him to join, aren't they? In the rebuild sort of phase that they're in now. So, yeah.
And then finally on the list, it's Haas. It was the same story as ever. They were decently qualifying. They went backwards. They haven't scored a point since Baku. They're having a terrible time.
Sad times.
Everything sucks at Haas.
Pretty much. Which brings us on to our awards, and we'll start with Driver of the Day.
It's an interesting one, this, because I think there's probably a few you could make good cases for. Like, I mean, Tsunoda's probably up there as one of them for me, because I think that was a really good drive. Don't know if anyone's got any, any others specifically, but
we'd be mad not to give it to Max Verstappen for making 5 overtakes in the world's fastest car, wouldn't we?
Overtake King Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
I mean, you lay that sarcasm down, but he did finish nearly 23 seconds ahead of his teammate in the exact same car.
That's true, but
despite starting 4 positions behind him,
I'm not sure it's the teammate that's. Well, I mean, look, I think if you had like an Alonso in that car or a Hamilton or someone else, I don't believe for 1 second that the gap would be 20 seconds. I think it'd be a much more interesting season.
I agree wholeheartedly, but I think it's unfair to label sarcasm against Max Verstappen when he is absolutely dominating his own teammate as well.
Tom, you better get used to the sarcasm, mate, because it's here to stay. Verstappen's going to be winning a lot of races this year, and the only way I'm going to be able to enjoy it is by enjoying it to the fullest.
Problem I have with it is it's deservedly so. You can't take that away from him.
He's been the best, hasn't he?
He has been absolutely on form. And even if that car wasn't as good as it was, he would probably still be in a very similar position to what he is.
Someone in the chat is like, is it the exact same car? That's a fair question. Is it the exact same car? Tinfoil hats at the ready.
There's not many other drivers like leaping out as a definite driver. Like Leclerc, Hamilton, Alonso all did good jobs. They did the job you'd expect them to do, I guess. I think I might want to give it to Tsunoda. He's the only person looking at this list that's done something you wouldn't expect.
I'm glad that was my suggestion then.
Yeah, okay, I can go for that.
And it's different. I don't think we've ever given it to him before.
Just on the tinfoil hat, because everyone's popping off about this on the tinfoil hat kind of thing. Like, it would be a good way of saving money would be to only put upgrades on one car and not on the other, wouldn't it? Especially when your budget is being squeezed and your aero time is... I suppose aero time applies for both cars, but if you wanted to only manufacture one set of upgrades, then that'd save you a bunch of cash. But they do clearly look the same, the cars, so I don't believe that.
While we're having this discussion, there is a question in the inbox from Darth Kilowog who says, do we think Max and Checo are actually running the same spec car? Checo may not be an A1 driver, but he's not a full Mazepin away from Max, is he? I enjoy Mazepin as a measure of F1 madness.
That is a good reference.
I suppose the question would be, if you're saying that, has anyone ever had the same car as Max? Because the last time a teammate was close to him was Daniel Ricciardo. For perspective, last time a teammate was consistently close to Max Verstappen was Daniel Ricciardo.
It's also a valid question. Like, that's just as valid a question.
I described this to a friend over the weekend as it's like comparing two footballers and they're both wearing the same boots, but those boots have been designed to perfectly fit one of the two footballers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the other one isn't also good, but the equipment is just specifically made for one of them and not at all made for the other one.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there's an extremely specific driving style there.
That too.
The very, very front-end based driving style. And generally speaking, everybody else goes more balanced. As a general rule of thumb, there's not many other drivers that go that way, although one of them is Daniel Ricciardo. And lo and behold, Daniel Ricciardo was a teammate that could go toe-to-toe. So therein lies part of the puzzle, I would say, or at least a big part of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Should we do move of the day? We're actually spoiled for choice this weekend.
Quite a few.
There are lots of good moves, yeah. I'll just run down the list that I jotted down. Stroll did a bit of a dive bomb onto Norris early in the race, which was quite tasty into the final chicane. We had a load of round the outsides of Leclerc moves. Tsunoda did Albon, Russell got Stroll, and Ocon got Tsunoda, which I think of those three, the Ocon one was probably the best of the bunch, because that was the one where he was behind through the braking zone, and then he kind of got off the brakes a bit early on turning and swung around the outside, which I thought was very good. We had Norris around the outside of Sargent at turn 10, which is not a place you normally see moves, although he did have a massive tyre advantage at that point. I also really enjoyed late in the race, Gasly got past Albon and they went side by side through like 13, 14 and 15, which was quite spicy.
I liked Gasly with Albon, basically. Obviously I enjoyed all of those, but I think at the time of watching them all unfold, I think that Gasly fighting with Albon and going wheel to wheel.
And I think they're probably
again showing drivers from the front how maybe to battle through those corners effectively without taking each other out.
Well, I mean, it's a bit different because it's dry, isn't it? But those two cars are quite, I would say, probably a fairly close match, right, at this point of the season. Like, they're not like a world away from each other. Yeah, they were both set up quite differently for this track, but I would say, like, in the pecking order, the Williams is, not a million miles away from the Alpine. And I think it gave us a real true battle like between two drivers for that reason. And it went on for many corners, so it was really exciting to watch. So that's my move of the day too.
Yeah, can't argue with that. Easy. And then final award.
Honestly, what the f*** are we doing here?
We've got a couple of nominations from Discord. One from Cody B, who said the FIA not declaring the track wet in the sprint shootout, even though the track was obviously wet, which is quite funny. And then Mike P just nominated the trophy. And it was a particularly ugly trophy this weekend.
Oh, I didn't see it. I tuned out as soon as
it was a bit of a weird looking thing. It got broken again, did you know, by the way?
I'm going to say, got broken again. WTF2, a second broken trophy in 2 races.
They just heard that last time we tried to give it to, like, when on earth does a trophy ever get broken? So, like, we'll show you.
Hold my beer.
2 in a row. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think maybe firing your entire management team after free practice maybe is up there.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
That's a good
Obviously,
one.
the decision might have been made before that, but it essentially was like, FP1's over and you're all fired.
Yeah.
They certainly announced it mid-weekend.
Yeah, I think probably for me, it's the million unsafe releases that happened during the sprint race, and they just would never even close to being looked
so
at.
many.
I think so strange. Like, there was a whole bunch of them, and they just ignored them completely.
Sport for choice again.
I do quite like the firing half your team mid-weekend.
That does have a good comedy. I think that's got my vote, actually.
That's going to be one where when we come to review the end of the season, we'll all go, oh yeah, that's a thing that happened. And there we go. Let's move on to predictions. Tom, do you want to do your thing?
Yeah, let's quickly go through these. So, as many of you may already know, the Predictions League is hosted at backofthegrid.com. So if you hear this next bit and you feel like getting involved once summer break's gone, go pre-register now. Then you're all ready and waiting. In terms of this week's scores, a ridiculous number of people all scored the same top score of 3 points. 43 people, including our very own Chris Evans right here, scored 3 points. That was the best score overall.
Didn't even notice.
Varying combinations. Not many people got the first DNF right, maybe because of the highs that McLaren have had recently. Maybe they weren't looking in that direction, but some people still got it. So it was achieved by some. In terms of the overall standings, though, what that does is it keeps James Hunt at the top with 28 points, but Effortlessly and Benjamin Claxton are very close behind, tied for second with 27 points. And just a shout out to like everyone who got involved as well generally this weekend, because well over 200 people who entered scored at least a point, which I know in a Max Verstappen dominance era is probably quite easy, but that's still a nice number for us to see entering and actually scoring points. So that's really good. In terms of the fantasy leagues, we've got the Grid Rival Fantasy League, which this week was won by F301 Bish with 980 points this weekend. And Effortlessly still leads the way there with 12,173 points. And I noticed this weekend as well, Effortlessly is 4th in the world on Grid Rival for this season, representing our league.
That's good going.
Yeah.
So a little shout out for that. And then over on the official F1 Fantasy League as well, we've got Alpine RT with 346 points winning the weekend. And the Spinquisition still leads the way there. I feel like that's been the same all season, but they have 3,592 points now. So yeah, a little shout out there for all of you. And as I said before, if you want to get involved with any of those things, head to backofthegrid.com. Can sign up for the Predictions League and see how it works on there. And there's also links on there for both the fantasy leagues if you want to join one or both of them.
Cool.
I guess it's time for inbox at this point, isn't it?
Hit the button.
Keep me saying now. But stay out.
Box.
Hey, man.
Who wants the first one?
I'll take the first one. The first couple, yeah. Benson, these are both from Benson, and there's another one from Lucas. So Benson says, hey man, after the start behind the safety car in the wet for the sprint and everyone pitting for Inters as soon as it came in, does this mean that that's all for the wet tyre now? or will we actually get to see some racing going on them? And Lucas says, hey man, if we aren't going racing on the wet tyres anymore due to safety, and everyone have to pretend that bringing a few less tyres to each race will make a meaningful difference to their sustainability, can they not just bring the wet tyre to races and abandon the stupid quali setup tried at Hungary? Or can they just not bring the wet? That doesn't. I mean,
good point.
It's a very good point.
Yeah.
Teams don't like using them, do they? Drivers don't like using them. Pirelli themselves have said we kind of agree with the drivers, which is, I guess, where some of these questions have come from. They've basically said, like, yeah, we sort of see why teams don't like the wet tyre. It feels useless. I mean, surely that just means we need to look at a redesign of the tyres to some degree.
Well, so in that interview where the guy from Pirelli, I can't remember specifically who it was, basically said, like, yeah, we do accept that the wet tyres are basically only good for clearing water behind the safety car now. But he did make the point that earlier this season, they designed and brought a new compound of wet tyre that was supposed to be more raceable. And all of the teams tried it and said, yeah, seems great, let's have it. And now they're all just having exactly the same complaints. So he was a little bit like, well, we tried and all the teams said it was good and now they've changed their mind. So
what? Just an idea to float out there, probably because of where we were over the weekend. What about making the Inter slightly more capable in more difficult wet conditions, like moving it a little bit more towards the wet and having something like a hybrid tyre, which is essentially where I'm coming from, what is used in Formula E, which is semi-grooved. It's like what the intermediate is. It's a semi-grooved slick, but it actually runs dry and wet without too much difficulty transitioning between the two.
Are we not missing the point of this though? I don't think the issue is with the grip of the tire. I think it's the visibility.
No,
is
exactly.
the issue, isn't it? The tire grips. It runs great. It's the fact that you can't see when everyone runs the tire because it kicks so much mist up into the air that you can't. So much spray in the air that you can't race because you don't know where you are on the track. Yeah, and that's not. They've run these tires before we had this aero formula. They were running these tires and no one was complaining. It's only since the new aero formula they started complaining because of the amount of spray. And you know, call me crazy, but when you've got when all your downforce is generated through cycling air through the underfloor, disturbing the air underneath there, and inherently disturbing the water that's going to be there as well. Of course, there's going to be more spray. So I don't think it's fair to necessarily just blame the tyre and say the tyre's no good. I think they could make the softest, most grippiest tyre in the world, but as long as the diffuser's kicking out as much spray as what it is, then you're still going to have the same problem. They tried these, they tried the spray guards, and they're, for all intents and purposes, they're pretty ineffectual. And that's because the spray isn't just coming from the tyres; it's coming from underneath the car as well. So
almost entirely, it turns out, from the test, the conclusion was basically, yep, diffuser's the problem. Not a lot we can do.
So what we're saying is, get rid of the diffuser and go back to just no aero. Stu's dream of cigar race cars.
They would look sick, wouldn't they? But
you could stick a board over the back of the diffuser. That'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll be fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
I don't know what this. I think obviously they never really considered like racing in the rain for this aero formula. I don't think they who could have foreseen? I don't think anyone could have foreseen like this amount of spray being churned up during wet races. And plus, they don't really race in the wet that often still anyway. So yeah, I've had a few, but it's not been. I guess like with climate change and things, there's probably going to be more and more and more occasions when there are wet weather races, but that's not a debate we want to get into here. But yeah, I think it is a bit unfair to pile onto Pirelli the way people do. I think it's much more about the aero formula than it is about the tyre itself.
Yeah, for
fair.
sure.
Next one.
Next question from Sarah. Hey man, if Hamilton and Checo was not a racing incident, then what is?
You tell me.
Pedestrian sides.
Well, apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
answered. Moving on.
There are plenty of way, way, way worse things happened that have just gone down as racing incidents.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you tell me. You just go back through and watch any season of Formula One, and I'm sure you'll be able to find multiple incidents way worse, not penalised. But anyway,
yeah.
Next one.
Next one, Bob the Cat says, should fastest lap be scrapped? It seems to have stopped us from seeing Lewis battle for a podium.
I mean, I only watched the sort of edited down highlights, so like, was there ever a shot of Lewis catching up? I'm not really sure from what I saw.
I mean, it was within a good couple of seconds towards the end of the race. Whether it was a legit like attempt to push for a podium, I don't know, but I think maybe that's what between him and the team they'd kind of somehow worked out and sort of gone, well, it's going to be a hard push to make it work. We're not gaining any more than we're already gaining. Like, we can't close this 2-second window. Let's get an extra point. Why not? I think in that scenario,
I still like the fastest lap point, to be honest. Like in a season like 2021 where it was super close.
Yeah.
Having that extra way of scoring points, that extra dimension, I actually found really quite cool. I quite like it.
And what better way to attempt to get Max Verstappen's average points down to 25 than take 1 point away from him every race?
Exactly, yeah.
Just saying. There you go. I'm joining in with the sarcasm now.
Is it me? Next one, Dennis Miner says, hey man, with Alpine basically firing team principal and a couple of us on the pitfall, do you think their replacements are going to being thrown into the fire the way they are, or should they have waited until the end of the year to terminate them? And Cody B says, following the massive personnel overhauls this year at Alpine, which team is more of a mess right now, Alpine or Ferrari? Well, I think definitely Alpine.
Yeah,
Alpine's definitely more of a mess. I mean, I alluded to chopping and changing people in certain positions isn't always a solution. You don't address the actual problem there. You have to give these people in charge time to like effect change. And I feel like Ferrari is a team bad for not doing that sometimes. Alpine could quite easily be starting to fall into that trap of team leader doesn't get instant results, therefore fired, is not really the way to run a team. Yeah. You only have to look at the teams that are successful and how long team principals and key staff have been instilled in those teams to show what difference it does actually make when you do the comparisons. So they need to be careful, definitely.
Makes it all the more ironic that their answer to the problems at the moment looks like he's going to be Mattia Binotto, who just seems to be stepping out of the frying pan getting thrown out of a frying pan and landing in a fire. But I imagine we'll talk a lot more about that situation over the break. Yeah, presumably when Binotto is announced there,
if he is next.
Yeah. Last question from Billy Moyer. So I guess Daniel Ricciardo wasn't the answer at Alpha Tauri. Can we agree on that?
No. It's not been given even remote. No. He's done like what? He's not even done a proper race week.
Who are you, Helmut Marko?
I say that's even more premature decision than firing Nick De Vries.
Yeah. It's like, let's get De Vries back in there, shall we? No. Okay.
Yeah, he definitely needs a bit more time, I think.
Yeah.
I did see someone mention earlier that Perez right now is further behind Verstappen at the summer break than Gasly was at the summer break right before Gasly was fired. Just for a little interesting tidbit there. But anyway, that I think is everything from Belgium for us. Couple of honourable mentions that people have brought up in the last week that I said I would do. We have to mention Jake Dennis, who wraps up the Formula E World Championship with one race to spare, which was a shame because we were there for the second day in London, so we didn't get to see the majority of those celebrations or excitement. Quick mention as well to Sophia Flörsch. She became the first female driver to score points in F3 since the sort of reban from GP3, and the first points for her team this season. They basically nailed the tyre call and climbed from 24th to 7th on the grid.
Wow, that's a good result.
A heck of a way to score
Very
your first
good drive.
And then to finish off with a quick bit of housekeeping stuff. As we've said, that is it for the first half of the season. We're off for 3 weeks now, or F1's away for 3 weeks now. Last weekend of August is the next race in... It's at Zandvoort, isn't it, the next race?
Yeah, Zandvoort is next.
We'll still be around over the break. We'll definitely be doing a bit of a mid-season review. we've been talking for weeks about discussing the 2026 regulations, so we'll probably fit that in there as well. There's also, we had quite a lot of inbox this week that was not Grand Prix at Belgium related, so I've already thrown all that in the notes for next time, so we'll get to that. So if your question didn't get read out this week, it's probably in there for the next episode. If you want to send us a question or a comment or anything between now and then, as always, we're in all the usual places: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Don't forget we're on YouTube as well now. You can always drop us a YouTube comment if you want to leave a question that way. If you want to chat to all of our Discord friends, you can go to patreon.com/backofthegrid to find out how to join that. And if you're listening to this on the day it's released, I'm going to be at the Silverstone Museum. So I'll probably put some pictures of nice race cars on Instagram tomorrow. So have a look at that as well if you want.
That'd be fun.
That will be fun. But I think that is everything. So thank you as ever for joining us. We will almost certainly be back in a week's time. And until then, goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.